Hello, everyone. It's me, Andrew. I'm here in my home in William's office, and hopefully, you all are having a great start to your week. Um, Last night, we had a Let's Chat, and William and I talked about things that were going on in the store, including our book club. And then afterwards, we had Um, the virtual meetup for our book club. So hopefully, if you didn't get a chance to attend, that you're able to watch it on the replay if that's something that interests you, and that you had fun. And I thought it was a really thought-provoking conversation. We dug deep and talked about a lot of different things, and I enjoyed it. So hopefully, you enjoyed it as well. And if you want to participate in the future, if you're local, we have a local meetup on the last Sunday of every month. And then the last Monday of every month is the virtual meetup. So if that is something that you're kind of interested in, check it out. You can go to our website, that's allegorygallery.com, and you can check out our events. And there are links to our different groups, including the one on Facebook, the Inspired by Reading group on Facebook. And it has all the books that are listed for the rest of the year. And we might vote pretty soon on a couple of new ones, because what I do is I'll make a bookmark that we send out with all of our orders, and put in the store. And I like to include books that we're going to read as opposed to ones that we already read. So that way, if people want to participate, they can, it makes the bookmark more evergreen, I guess. It's not really evergreen because eventually we'll read through the books, but it is something that will, in my mind, at least last a little bit longer than being instantly thrown out. So we might go and we decide the next couple of books after our current selection, just so that we can kind of keep it fresh. And then that way people hang on to the bookmark. But we'll see. I'll ask people in the group if they think that's a good idea or not. Hopefully, you all are having a good start to your week. It's pretty chilly and kind of gray and overcast here. Hopefully, wherever you are is nicer. I know some people out in California still have snow today, which boggles my mind because we don't have snow. And usually we're the ones who are posting pictures of snow, and instead I'm posting pictures of flowers. So that's pretty exciting. If you are watching, let us know and tell us where you're watching from. It's always nice to chat with folks, and it's kind of like who's that? Is it Captain Kangaroo who is looking through the thing, and they're like, "I spy blah 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 watching, and I see Timmy and Tommy and Betty Sue." Um, I always like that. It's a nice way that we can, build community. And hopefully, if you see somebody who is relatively close to you, you can kind of, touch bases and, hang out and stuff. It's cool. We used to have people who were in little bead societies or little beading groups, and they would watch our lives, and which always surprised me. But um, I don't think that's too weird because I do that with other people. Um, Anyways, I see a couple different things. People tuning in. Lorraine is watching. Hey, Lorraine. Teresa's watching. Hey, Teresa. Norma's watching. She says, "Hi, Andrew. I'm halfway through the Zoom replay and wish I had read the second book and joined in. The the Kentucky themes were something I enjoy discussing." Yeah, we thought of you when that book selection came up. Um, our friend Jan Peeney is the one who recommended it, because when we went to Kentucky to pick up the hydraulic press, um, we had talked about being in the area, and I had Googled that area because had never really been there before. And that's when I started seeing things about blue people. And at first, I thought it was like a National Enquirer kind of, aliens among us and things like that. But then I did a little bit of digging, and it's all real. And then that's when I was like, "Can you believe that there's people who are blue?" I think that's so cool. But um, you know, I know some people, especially if you read the book, there are some people who definitely don't think blue people are cool, but I personally think blue people are cool. So if you are a blue person out there and you want to hang out, you always have a friend in me. Um, so I see a couple more people have tuned in. June is watching. Hey, June. Donna's watching. Oh, Romper Room. That's the one where they're like, I can see blah, blah, blah. Diane is watching. Are you still in Mesa or did you go somewhere else? Because don't you all like travel around? I can't remember. Teresa says, we had 6 inches of snow here today. It's 34 here on Long Island. Wow. We lost the power at some point last night. So William and I had to go to the cottage after the book club, and then make sure that the split system was working and that the pellet stove got turned back on. Barb said that it was still running, but sometimes when it's powering down, it will kind of run for a while. So you think it's going, but it's actually not going. So he had to pick up the pellets this morning, and he took the van so that he could go and bring some to his mom. I offered to help, but he said I could sleep in. I had a really hard time sleeping last night, and yeah, I won't digress into that. Marianne is watching. Barbara said there's a silver lady I know. There's another person that they took colloidal silver and it turned them blue, which I thought was kind of strange because whenever like I get sick or whatever, there's people who are like, "Oh, you should take colloidal silver." And I guess this guy took too much of it and he had a reaction and he turned himself blue. So, I always wonder about that. It's like how does that come to be like in this world and how does that relate to some of the stories that like fairy tales and folklores? I'm always interested to see um how how those are connected to real life things and how they mirror the world and explain the world around them. And I wonder sometimes because in parts of the British Isles there are blue people who are like mer people who will like cause storms and like drown people. And I'm like, is it because they saw somebody who was blue and that has that connection? I don't know. But it's interesting to me. There is this wonderful book that I read a couple years ago. I don't even know if it's in print anymore, but it's called Breaking the Enchantment. And it goes through different fairy tales and it talks about some of the underlying social and economic and societal things that were going on that kind of influenced the creation of those stories. Like there are stories about like Little Red Riding Hood, and it's like a cautionary tale for incest. And there's things like so there are interesting things that uh, at least I think it's interesting when you get a glimpse into another world, and it kind of helps explain that world a little bit better in a more human way. I think sometimes when I read something and it's I guess it doesn't make it's not a complete surprise because we named our store Allegory Gallery, and allegories are things that have hidden meanings and understandings. And so I think it's really important when you can look at a story and get a kind of a human perspective that's maybe not always easily as translated in just like, either sometimes people weren't allowed to say things or they were illiterate and didn't have the ability to write and document things, or their stories were marginalized and swept under the rug. So sometimes those stories were the ways that people could kind of low key deliver messages without being like openly in confrontation with people. So it's kind of interesting. At least I think so. Marianne says hello again. Teresa says blue people are cool. Soshi says hello. Hi, Soshi. Amanda's watching. Hey, Amanda. Diane says yes, we travel, but we are here in Mesa all winter. That's good. Barbara says I had to take silver therapy for Lyme disease, but left. Had to take. Oh, the silver lady had to take silver therapy for Lyme disease, but it left her gray and silver. That's a thing. If you take too much silver, it can turn your gums and your teeth black or blue or gray, which is always interesting because I guess you have to have like a ton of exposure to it, and I guess any exposure to heavy metals is probably you have to use caution, as we are discovering. Barbara says it's a thing, so be careful about that. Yeah, I don't necessarily use it a ton because I don't, especially after we have started wearing masks more, I don't get as sick as much. But now things are opening up, I don't wear a mask as much anymore. But I haven't gotten sick for a while, so that's pretty good. Barbara says it's anthropologic. It's all anthropologic. Oh, the stories. Yeah, it's pretty cool. I think there's something fascinating about people and why they do the things they do. So, Marianne says there are blue people in Ireland, and Barbara says, I agree, Andrew. Interesting thoughts. All right. So, I'm going to give you a little bit of a backstory on the demo today. So I've taught this workshop a couple of times, and by a couple of times, I mean a lot. And I've traveled all over the country teaching this, and normally we charge money for this. But my kind of rationale is it's out there in the world, and I'm not the only one who teaches sculpting, and it's a different experience when you get like one-on-one. You get a different experience when you're in a class and you're sitting there, and I can help spend individualized time with a person. So it's a little bit different, but so I don't necessarily feel bad about teaching this because I know some people have paid to take this class from me in the past. And at first I was like, maybe I shouldn't, because they might feel as though they have, that they didn't, I don't know. I just kind of sometimes think that if somebody paid for something and then I'm giving it away for free, that maybe they'll not be happy. But I think I will give a little less immersive, because I won't go into like tool making and stuff like that. So that's another thing. So hopefully people don't get upset. And if they do, they'll just have fun, and they'll get to experience it again. And what I will do is that if you're in the Patreon, I'm gonna post if you're in the Star Cottage Studio Patreon, I'm gonna post the written instructions, and that has step-by-step written instructions and pictures if I can find them. And hopefully William will remind me to post them, because sometimes I forget about things. Cheryl says, "Hi, Andrew and all. Enjoying listening to your conversation while I work." Oh, good. I always, even if people don't necessarily follow along, I always like when people are like, "Hey, I'm hanging out and working while you're sharing and stuff." Because I do that too. Sometimes I put on people's lives and I will watch or kind of like listen while I'm doing other stuff. And there's some really cool things like that are coming up. So at the end of this month, there is a wonderful organization called Metalworks. They're based out of Massachusetts and they are doing a spring symposium. I've shared about it on my personal timeline and on my Instagram stories. And basically, it's a week, I think it's a week of different presentations. Excuse me. And there are 10 different presenters, and they make all different kinds of things. It's a really diverse lineup. This year, I was asked if I wanted to nominate some people. And so that was a real honor. That symposium was how I got involved with Metalworks. So it definitely holds a special place in my heart because that's kind of like my introduction. Like I sort of heard of them, but before the pandemic, a lot of their classes were in person, and I wasn't really taking classes then. And it was like in like the periphery, but it wasn't something like I wasn't gonna like travel to Massachusetts just to take a class, especially since I wasn't really taking classes at the time. Now I would consider it. There's a Linda Darty class that if we stumble across some cash money, I'm gonna want to ask William if he can spare me the time to go and learn with her because she's an amazing enamelist and her book is well worn because I have used it as a reference until it's basically falling apart. I would be a little bit scared that I'd fangirl a little bit too much, but I'm sure she's used to it. She lives in Italy now. She's living her best under the Tuscan sun life now. And I don't think she comes to the US very often to teach anymore. So this is kind of a rare opportunity. So if I can do that, I want to do that. But anyway, so circling back, is they're having a symposium at the end of the month. It does cost money, but they do have scholarships. So if you're interested in doing this and you may be short on funds, you can always fill out their scholarship form. And it's sponsored by Rio Grande. And they give out scholarships. That's how I got to attend the first one. Um, and since then, I participate in their virtual community, and I've been lucky enough to go to different conferences and symposiums, and I've seen some of the people, and I've gotten to know them, and it's kind of fun to see people in real life when you only see them online. So yeah, if you're interested in that, there are going to be demos on chasing and repousse and enameling and all kinds of fun stuff. So check that out. It should be a lot of fun. And I will definitely be watching. So there is a slight conflict in one of the days, but luckily you can watch things on replay, but I kind of like to watch things live. So we'll see how that goes. It's kind of hard to take off a whole solid week, but it should be fun. And then also, so I guess this is the mixed blessing. Is I had applied for this grant to take a blacksmithing workshop, and unfortunately, I got rejected. However, I said, I really love this organization and what you're doing. If there's any chance that I can help, just let me know. And they wrote back and they said, we do have an opening to help review uh, applications for different grants and scholarship opportunities. So who knows? Maybe I will be doing that and helping in a different way. And so yeah, we'll see. Marianne says, "Oh, goody, written instructions." And Barbara says, "Oh, I'm going to the cool Picasso exhibit at the Mint Museum in Charlotte." Oh, good. Um, so yeah, so we, uh, yeah, I lost my train of thought. But anyway, so it's been a busy day. One of the people who is working on the museum exhibit in Memphis that I'm going to be a part of contacted me today, and they were asking me about if they could use my picture rights and stuff. And I was like, yes, please do. Anything I can do to help would be great. So we've been keeping busy, and yeah, I'm excited. All right. So uh, William would tell me to remind you all to push the like button and the heart button or the thumbs up on the videos so that it does things with the mysterious algorithm, and it makes it so that more people see our videos. And the more people who see our videos, the more things we can do. So push the buttons, and it will be great. Also, if you'd be so kind to share the video, I'm also told that that also helps increase our viewership. So please do if that's your flavor. Um, Cindy says, hashtag replay. Actually, we're live. So if you are curious, we are live right now. All right, so let's turn the camera around and we'll get down to business, y'all. Oh, and before we do that, I want to remind people, we asked if people wanted us to extend William's birthday sale, and people said yes. So if you want to take advantage of that, that's on our website. That's allegorygallery.com. And if you use the code birthday sale, you'll save 20% off your order. So there you go. All right. So, and I also wanted to take a moment to say thank you to everybody who takes a little bit of time out of their day to spend with us, whether you're watching live or on the replay. We really appreciate it. For us, it's really important to build and create community. And so that's really important to us. And we appreciate that you are making the choice to spend that time with us. So thank you so much. Sometimes we know full well there are a lot of options out there, and that people live busy lives and they don't necessarily have to spend time with us. But the fact that they do, it really means a lot to both me and William. So thank you for taking the time to hang out with us and build community together. And I know I kind of sound like a broken record, but I try to live my life from a place of gratitude. And one of the ways that I do that is I try to make a conscious effort to thank people and to let them know what, how I feel. Because sometimes people just assume and I'm guilty of this as well. But to actually know that somebody is grateful for your help or for your time or whatever is really important. So thank you all, and we really appreciate it. We could not do any of this without you all. And that sounds like a cliche, but it's true. If nobody watched these lives, we couldn't do the lives because it just wouldn't make sense to do them. And I feel like our community would be much smaller than it is, and we wouldn't have that same opportunity to, share with one another and get to know each other. I feel really privileged and honored to be able to get to know so many of you out there in the world. our lives are a little bit different than some of the other people who are doing kind of craft-based lives. A lot of times it's and I'm not saying this in a bad way because I know that some people have reasons for doing things the way they do them, but for us, it's really important to get to know all of you out there. So, yeah. Lena says, thank you for all the tips and tricks, product knowledge, and free tutorials. I try to do my best. And also, I'm going to remind people if there's something that you want to see or learn from me, let me know because sometimes I don't know what you all want to know. And I'm just like, well, I like flowers, so let's do flowers. But if you're like, I want to learn this specific technique, sometimes I don't know them, but we can sometimes find people who do know them. And that's a segue to our new Saturday tutorials. William and Jen are filming right now at the shop. Um, they film on Tuesdays after he gets out of his other job. And they film kind of a couple weeks in advance. And if you missed it, this past Saturday at early in the morning on Saturday, there was a really wonderful wire tutorial that Jen from J&T Creations shared. And it's a really lovely project. And I've seen a couple of you do it or try your hand at it. So that's really lovely. And also up next on Saturday is it's called a fishbone macrame project. I kind of think it looks like a leaf, but they said it's like a fishbone. But I guess she also said that depending on the materials you use, it'll change the look. And that's debuting on Saturday morning. If you don't want to get up at the early crack of dawn, I had to mentally modify my speech real quick. If you don't want to get up early, you can always watch on the replay. But the one thing that I will say is that if you comment on that, it will sometimes, and if you comment after the video has been, after it goes and launches or does this premiere thing, sometimes your comments will end up in different places. And so you can't really do this like, talk with other people while you're watching. So just keep that in mind. And that's coming up on Saturday. You can go to our YouTube channel and click the picture and the notification so you get a reminder of it coming on, and then it will tell you when it comes on, and then you won't miss it, hopefully. All right, so let's flip this around and get started. How about it? All right, so this setup may look familiar, and it's because last week we did some tutorials on how to work, with polymer clay. And we went through the basics of conditioning clay and using cornstarch as a resist. And we talked about, we basically went through not all the basics, but a good many basics. And then the next day, we did a tutorial on adding color to your polymer clay creations. And that's where we made things like this. So if you missed that, I'm going to try to get the because this is kind of weird when you have the phone in the way of what you're doing. And sometimes I'll be using sculpting tools and they have longer handles. So I don't want to hit my phone. So I might have to adjust this. And usually I work on a tile, like a subway tile. and that's because I can pick it up and move it, and I don't have to mess around with it. But I don't have that with me at in the house. All of that stuff I brought to the cottage. So I'm just going to work directly on this. I could work on this. I might do that instead because then I can lift it up and we can look closer together. It's not necessarily the most ideal, but it'll work. Um, all right. So, yeah. So if you missed any of those tutorials, you can always go back on our Facebook page. If you go to the section that says media, there's a section for lives. It depends what version you have. Sometimes there is a video playlist, and you can just go through those. Um, yeah, we just recently did those and they should be close to the top. So you'll be able to see them easy. And if you want to watch those on the replay, if you haven't seen them already, or if you want to go back and go over some information that you may have missed the first time, that's one way. Or you can also go to YouTube and we've got all the playlists there as well. So check it out if you're curious. So I'm not going to spend too much time on the basics. We're just going to kind of get to it. My favorite sculpting tool is an African porcupine quill. And of course, I don't have one here. But William, he bought this. He's been getting into, or he was getting into ceramics. Hopefully, he'll pick that up again pretty soon. But so he bought a bunch of tools and he just so happened to leave them here. And so I'm going to borrow them and use them for the demo. One thing that I will tell you, and this is something that really changed my life as a maker, is that if you have a tool and it's not doing the thing you want it to do, you can always modify your tool. So if you have something and it's not the right shape, you can always do stuff like file it down or grind it down or sand something. So there's a lot of ways that you can modify your tools so that they do the thing you want them to do. If you have very expensive tools, I would not recommend doing that necessarily because, if you spend a lot of money, you would hope that it's designed to do the thing that it's meant to do. But if you have inexpensive tools or found object tools, those work wonderfully, and you can modify with wild abandon and not feel any pressure about it. So just keep that in mind. It's something that I always like to tell people. I taught a class about creating sculpting tools, and I think it's a helpful thing when you are approaching things a little bit more seriously. And what I mean by that is that sometimes you'll get something and it just won't do the thing you want it to do. So you can do things to it. And that little understanding is like, it, it shook me when I realized I could do my own tool, make my own tools. And I think going forward in my own practice, my goal is to understand how to create more of my own tools. So I don't know how efficient that is. Sometimes, instead of buying a hammer that's really nice, you take a bunch of classes into how to do it, and maybe you'll come out with something that's usable. But the goal or the hope is that you will understand things a little bit more and become familiarized with the process of the making and how that is translated into your work. And I think that's important because not all materials are the same. So one of the reasons why I like to use a African porcupine quill usually is because you can modify it. So if it's not the right shape, you can always sand it down and buff it to make it smoother. It's also lightweight, which is really important if you're doing like a big sculpture and you have a lot of detail work. um, as makers, I feel like they don't always stress the fact that we can harm our bodies by doing repetitive motions or fatiguing our hands or our joints or our muscles. So I think it's good whenever you can kind of think about things and say, hey, maybe instead of using this great big heavy tool, I make a wooden version of that tool, and you can whittle a stick and or file down a shish kebab skewer or a popsicle stick or a cuticle stick, and you'll get the same results, if not better, and it won't cause the fatigue if you have, say, like a great big cast metal piece. All right, so I'm going to be borrowing these tools from William. In reality, I'm only probably going to be using a small number of them. And these are not, these are designed for ceramics. So, I mean, there are useful tools in this. Like one of my favorite tools is a ceramic tool. It's basically a pointy, like an awl, which, let's see, do they have one? I guess this one is really useful. It's basically, you could make this yourself by, putting a nail and sanding down a nail and making a nice little point. Um, and people like sanding down a nail. Yeah, you can do that. You can modify them. So we'll be using this one, this little stabby tool. It's like an awl. And then the other one that I'm going to need is something that's got a little bit more of the scoop to it. And this is going to be for blending. So I'm going to probably use this one. And I'm going to, let's see, I'm going to feel it for one. Because sometimes when they're straight out of the package, there can be porosity or different things like that. So make sure it's not super rough, because if you do have a rough tool, that's going to telegraph to your sculpture. So just keep that in mind. I also am probably going to use like the backs of this paintbrush. It's smooth. The paint is securely on, so I'm not going to accidentally leave a bunch of paint crumbs in it, and it should work for some of the larger blending. This will work for some of the more detailed blending. Julie's watching. She says she can't stay, but wanted to say hi, and we'll watch later. So I've got some polymer clay, and this is the leftovers from the other demos that I did. And it's been preconditioned, but I'm going to do a light conditioning to get it kind of a little bit softer to work with. I don't want it to be mushy. So I'm using Super Sculpey or Sculpey number 3. If you use the original recipe, it's like a white Sculpey. And also Primo, which is Sculpey brand also now. If you use the white Sculpey, it is on the softer, mushier side. And the issue with that is that sometimes if you're building up layers of detail, you can crush the detail as you're working. And so you'll like sculpt an eye and it will look awesome. And then you'll go to sculpt the other eye. And then by just holding it, you'll end up crushing some of that detail. So what we're going to do is use this a little bit firmer clay. Now, if I would not recommend necessarily using Fimo. Fimo is a much stiffer clay and is usually designed for cane work. So what that means is you make these like strips and these like patterns, and then you make logs that are you make an image using those kind of, it's almost like pixels, and then you build those into a log, and then when you slice it, because the clay is stiffer, it won't distort as much. So Fimo and stiff clays, hard clays, are usually designed for that kind of purpose. So I'm just using a blend. Super Sculpey is my go-to, and Primo. All right. And that should hold and retain the detail that we need for our projects. And this is just the clay that I had left over from the last two projects that we showed. All right. So I'm going to roll this out into a ball. If you need, and this is something like if you need a ball, and this may seem super basic, but if you put this in that kind of crook of your, in that little soft spot right there in the palm of your hand, and then you use your other and you go like this, it will make a nice round smooth ball. All right. And I'm going to pinch off a little bit because I'm going to use that for my details. So I'm going to press this out, or round this out into a ball. Now, one of the things that I do when I teach this class more in depth is I sometimes will make little workbooks with different faces. So I'll make a collage from magazines. And one of the things you realize when you look at different faces is that people have different shapes of their faces. And one of the other things that I like to do is show people who are super expressive in their facial expressions. And so that way, when you look at it, you can kind of translate what you see into what you're making. So you're just going to have to imagine along with me um, a face that we're going to look at. I think it's more helpful if you look at faces while you're sculpting faces. Um, I think it's really helpful. And I think it's like when I was in art school, we did a lot of exercises with live model drawings, and what that helped do is that when I went to draw from my own imagination and drew fantasy things, I could pull from that muscle memory and that anatomical knowledge, and it looks a little bit more right. So, and I think a lot of, excuse me, even fantasy creatures, if you base them on things that are based in the real world, there's a little bit of that authenticity that tricks the mind into thinking that, oh, this thing could be real. This thing could exist. Now, I will preface and say that this is a very whimsical way of sculpting, and this is not necessarily the way that you would render somebody's face exactly. I mean, you can certainly take some of the things that I'm showing you and apply it in that way. But I will say that it's important that if you are doing this, you know that the results you're going to get are going to be more kind of like a sketch or a caricature of a face as opposed to an exact rendition. Now, if you are interested in doing that, there are tons of resources out there where they show you how to build a face step by step in that way to get those results. So it just depends on what you're doing and what you're making and how you want it to look. All right. Harry's watching. Hey, Harry. Sharon's watching. Can you explain more about what you do with magazine faces? So with the magazine faces, I just have them around me, and they can inspire me and show me like different proportions. Sometimes, I think there's this idea that artists just have a head full of ideas and that they just come fully baked out. But sometimes we need a little bit of help from our surroundings and the world around us. So, it does not, I think there's no shame in the game if you use a photograph as a reference. or inspiration to create, your fantastical sculpture. All right, so I've rolled this out into a ball, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to roll this out a little bit more, and I'm going to taper this a little bit. So I've rolled this out into an oval shape, a little egg shape, and it's a little bit smaller on this end. It's a little bit bigger on this end. Not terribly noticeable, but enough. And I'm working on this is a clay cutter and a clay shaper, but I'm just going to use this because I don't have a tile. Um, and in theory, I could work directly onto this tempered glass surface and use this to scrape this. But because I want to be able to show this like this and pick it up, I'm going to work on this today. So I'm just going to press this down. And like I said, depending on the shape you make, it will determine the shape of the face. So if you want a very round and kind of cherubic face, if you start off with a long kind of oval face, oval shape, you're going to have to do work to condense it down and make it more round. So start with that foundation of the shape you want. Um, uh, it really does help. All right. And so I'm going to take my finger. Our fingers are our most valuable and important tools, especially when we're sculpting. Um, and so I'm going to take this and I'm going to go where I think the eye socket is going to be, and I'm going to press in and I'm going to press in. All right. So I've got those two indentations, and then I'm going to take my finger again and I'm going to press down, and I've got those kind of cavities. These are the eye sockets, and this is going to be where the mouth is, and this is going to be where the nose is. Now, I have these wonderful little glass beads that I picked up in Tucson, and I think they're charming. I like them. Taxidermy eyes can get kind of expensive, and there are other places that you can get eyes, like doll eyes and stuff, but again, it can kind of get pricey. So this is an affordable option. I'm gonna ask William to add these to the website, and we'll sell them by like the pack of 10 or something like that, or 12, or we'll figure it out. They'll be pretty inexpensive. So if you are interested in getting these will be available in the online store soon. So keep your eyes peeled. LOL. No pun intended. Pun intended. All right. So I've got these, and I'm going to take this and I'm going to make sure that, oops, that rolled because they're round. So one thing that I want to make sure is if I'm going to use a round bead for my eyes, I want to make sure that that I have enough clay built up this way so that when I press them in, they're not like bugging out super hard. Now, if you're working with a very shallow relief and you're sculpting and you don't really want to build up the clay too thick, you will want to probably use like a cabochon. Now, one of the reasons why I use glass eyes or beads for eyes is that they are automatically very smooth. So if I mold this and I make a resin copy, what's going to happen is that it's not going to have the texture that clay would. Now, if you want, you can certainly make your own round shapes and use those out of clay. If you do that, I would say make the balls first, smooth them down, use those baby wipes to get any kind of fingerprints off of them, bake them beforehand, and then that way when you're working with them, they won't get squashed while you're manipulating clay around them. All right, so here you go. So I've got these eyes. They do have holes, so you just have to be mindful not to entrap. You have to have a way for the air to escape because otherwise it can kind of hot air will expand. And if you make something like this, it will have a pocket of air if you don't have anywhere for it to escape. So just keep that in mind. It's not like the end of the world if it does happen. But anyway, so I'm gonna take these and I'm gonna kind of insert them in here. And there you go. And so I'm going to get this closer to you so you can see it. And these are kind of googly moogly eyes. And they only come in the one color of that kind of mossy green. And I think that's fun. All right. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take some of this clay and I'm going to roll out some shapes. But first, what I'm going to do is, actually, I should have done this beforehand, but I'm going to pinch up this and push this up like this. And that's going to kind of create a nose, the rough beginning of a nose. So a lot of what we're going to be doing is we're going to be taking and manipulating the clay, adding clay, and then smoothing down and blending edges. So what I'm going to do with this little ball of clay here is I'm going to roll it out into a little snake or coil, and I'm going to pinch it off like so. And I'm going to roll the edges of the clay. All right. So it's going to be tapered on both ends. So it comes down to a point on this end, it comes down to a point on this end. And then I'm going to place this above the eye that I just put. And then I'm going to do the same thing again, rolling out this little snake and putting it under the eye. And I'm going to do this for the other side. And now notice I'm not really tacking anything down just yet. So I'm kind of just loosely placing stuff. And I'm going to do that again for this side. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my tool and blend down the edges. So I'm going to take this and hold this up so you can actually see. But I'm going to kind of press everything down, and I'm going to be careful not to press too much on this end. I really only want to blend this seam over here. Now, it looks like we're going to have to add more clay for the eye. I could press this in a little bit deeper, but I'm going to add more later. All right. Who remembers the episode of MacGyver where they found a skull and then he took the ends of pencil erasers and then he did like a facial reconstruction? That's like a core memory for me. And so I've always been interested in faces and expressions. Um, and I think it's such a, I talked about a little bit earlier about people and why they do the things they do. And I think sometimes our faces, they there's an evolutionary reason of why we make the faces that we do, and then being able to pick up those signals um, that we make with our faces and our body language and stuff. So I think it's cool. It's fascinating to me. Also, I think some people can't pick up those social cues or that body language. So I think it's interesting when you can't. Now these ones, the eyes are a little bit more pronounced. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to repeat that step again, but maybe using a slightly bit more clay so that we create that eyelid. And I'm being really rough right now. I'm not, as you can tell, I'm not being super particular of the shape yet. And the reason why I don't really care too much is that it's so early in this process that we are really just scraping the surface, and the face is going to change a lot by the things we do. All right. So before we get to the end, like when we get closer to the end, I'm going to be a little bit more careful. But for now, I'm just going to keep on kind of roughing things out. Um, and then I can work on refining uh, those, those that clay that I've added. Lena says this would make a great count run count base. And oh, like Sesame Street style. Well, if you wanted to, you could definitely do that. I have a lot of respect for the puppeteers and people who made those because it's wild, you know. We were talking about this the other night at book club. Um, One of the people, their kid is deciding kind of what they want to do, and they kind of have been told their all their lives, you know, that you know, you can't really make a living as an artist. But you know what? I know probably 1,000 artists off the top of my head who make a living on their artwork or um, their creativity. And I can name very few people who, you know, make a living as a professional athlete. So, you know, I think that's one of those things where it's always good to kind of get a different perspective. And I think nowadays, especially with the internet, there's a little bit, it's a little bit easier to be able to make an income off of your artistic practice. I think before you would end up having to move to a place like New York City or a place with that critical mass so that you had those opportunities. I know at least when I was growing up and considering going to art school, I definitely felt that I had to go to New York City to make it as a professional artist because they had more people. There was just more opportunities readily available. But now with the internet, I feel like there's a lot of chances for people to do that without having to live in necessarily a big city. I know that for us, we live in a town of 1,500 people, so and we've had our business for I believe almost 12 years. So yeah, you can make a living as a professional creative in a small town now a little bit more easier than you can uh, than before. All right. So the thing about this is I've sculpted these eyes and still everything's pretty rough. You know, it's pretty rough still, but I can always go back and adjust that. But right now I'm just kind of working on the general features. So I've made this indentation and I'm going to roll out a coil, a little slug here that's shaped like this. And I'm going to put maybe a little bit smaller. If I want to add more clay, I can always add more clay. I can always take away clay. If I'm unhappy with something, I can just scrape it off and start over. But this is kind of an additive process. So I've made this little banana slug, and then I'm going to put that right there. And that's going to, again, I'm only going to smooth down the top part of this. I don't want to smooth down both sides yet. Um, it doesn't necessarily matter on this one as much. But if you know, I think when you're looking at the lips in particular, it helps. All right. So the next thing I'm going to do is make another shape and like that, a little slug, and I'm going to put that in there in the bottom. All right. Again, I'm being super loose and gestural. I'm smoothing down this one side. And already you can see in a very short amount of time, sorry about that. Um, in a very short amount of time, I've already kind of roughed out the face and it's already coming more to life. All right. So I'm going to get this all kind of shape and I'm going to stab them into this hole. And I'm going to do a little bit of a wiggle, and that's going to create the nostril hole. All right. So one thing that I always recommend is kind of look at things from different angles so that you can see kind of from different angles if you have to smooth anything down. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take um, a little ball here, and I'm going to roll it out on one side, but I'm going to keep that kind of it's going to make a long teardrop, basically. And you can see that there's cornstarch residue, and I should probably have wiped down the surface before I started working, but you can see like I was trying to like roll it on this glass and it would not catch. So I used this to roll it on. Anyway, so I've made this kind of teardrop shape, this elongated teardrop shape, and I'm going to put this right here. And I'll get my fingers out of the way in a second. All right. And I'm going to straighten that up. I mean, this is also where you can start building in narrative elements in your work. So, if, for example, you want a character that has kind of this is a good thing when you look at different faces and you can see different things. So if you wanted to make a like a hero that's like a warrior who's been through a lot of battles, you think about how those experiences have changed the face. So you might increase the brow and make the brow heavier, and maybe make the nose exaggerated and slightly crooked to show that they've been into fights, or um, little things like that. So there's little opportunities to build those narratives into that. So one thing that I do is I will tell myself stories about the things that I'm making while I'm making them, and that sometimes helps with the process, or I'll listen to audiobooks while I'm working, and that will help. So what I'm doing right now is there's kind of that seam, so I want to blend that seam, and so I'm just doing that on both sides and at the bottom, and I'm gonna make sure that it's fully adhered. Now, if I was doing this with ceramic, I would probably score and slip with the ceramic. And what that means is you make these little lines, and then you put the slip, which is basically a glue, and then you would like rub it back and forth until it clings on. And that way, there's a full adhesion. With this, we're smoothing down so much that I don't think we have to worry about it as much. So what we're going to do is I'm going to look at this face again and start smoothing out certain things. Like these eyes are the how they call it, occipital lobe, or uh, the hole that your eye rests in is deep, but it it shouldn't mound up too much in there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of smooth these down, and what that's going to do is it's going to also start creating the lines of the cheekbones. It's going to kind of create those folds around the eyes. And what I'm also going to do is I'm going to take the very tip of this and I'm going to start delineating the nostril. All right. So I'm going to do that on this side. And it's basically like a parenthesis mark on either side of this nose hole, the nostril holes. And I'm going to kind of just kind of push the clay, and I'm making these marks. They're kind of rough, but you can see that I'm kind of carving out and pressing the clay and smashing it in a way that it's going to create that kind of illusion of a nose. And what I'm also going to do is I'm going to take the flat end of this and I'm going to pull this down from this little section here in the upper lip, because generally speaking, we have this where your teeth, your upper teeth are underneath this lip, so they stick out a little bit more. So there's also going to be a mark right here, which is the cleft in the lip. And depending on the person, it might be more subtle or more less subtle, depending on the person, and just smooth that out. All right. Now, one thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to get this tip here, and I'm going to use this tip, and I'm just going to push up that lip just ever so slightly in those two where that cleft is in the upper lip. All right. And then this is where the face is really, it depends on the face, right? So in theory, you could be done. If you don't want to do more, that could be it, and you could be happy. It looks like a face. There's eyes, there's nose, there's lips. But I think where you can go further is you start adding details. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take 2 balls of clay, and I'm going to put these on the cheeks right here. All right. And so it's got this like this, it's got the balls on the side, and those are going to make the cheeks. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to smooth the edges of that around so that I am, for one, attaching the balls of clay. And then the other thing is, I don't necessarily want there to be a great big seam where I've made those points of connection. All right. So you can kind of see. Also, one of the things I'm going to say is I probably should have conditioned this clay just a wee bit more because it's looking a little rough. And what I mean by that is when I smooth this over, it should make a smooth edge. And what it's doing is I can see there's a little bit of a crumble action happening. And that means that I could have conditioned this a little bit better. I'm not going to stop and scrap this and start all over, because I think it's conditioned enough that it's going to be sticky enough that it's going to do what I need it to do. But I probably should have conditioned this a wee bit more. All right. So here we go. I've got this. I've got to smooth this around and kind of blend this a little bit more and make sure. And then what I'm going to do is, depending on the cheekbones, this is another good opportunity. If you have those faces from the magazines and stuff, you can determine like the facial structure. So if you make them higher, how will that look? If you make them lower, how will that look? If you make them bigger, how will that look? Does it look like they're puffing up their cheeks? What do you want their, it depends on what the face you want it to look like. Sometimes if you have the ability to draw, you can sketch it out beforehand, and then you can try to kind of replicate that as well. I think one of the things that I want to impart to you is we're going to work from the general to the specific. And I usually say this over and over and over and over again. It's the most general to the specific. So what that basically means is we're going to rough things out and find the most general shapes, and then we're going to add details on top of that. So when you're drawing, when you're drawing a head, for example, you're going to start off with this like egg shape, and then you can figure out where the eyes are and where the lips are, and you can kind of go from that general shape to the more specific shapes and add details and eventually shading and blending to get the looks that you want. All right. So general to the specific. Now, if you want, you can also work on symmetry. So if I work on this side, I'm going to want to go over on this side and work on that as well. So I'm going from this side to this side, because if I do all of the work on here and then I try to do all of the work on here, it can kind of sometimes be lopsided, and that's fine if you're going for that. But I think it's helpful, especially when we're trying to keep things relatively symmetrical, to if I work on this eye, then I should work on this eye, and that way when there's a kind of a more even completion, like an overall doneness, as opposed to just one small section being done at a time. Now, right here, it's really rough, and this is from the clay not being super conditioned. And also, I think sometimes when I use this, the pearlescent polymer clay is a little bit of a stiffer clay, and it's a little bit more crumbly. So that could also be affecting this. So I'm smoothing this out. There are different techniques that you can use to get smoother textures. Some people will sometimes use a little bit of water, and that will it will help glide the tool. And you can use the back of like a dental tool to kind of burnish the clay, and the little bit of water acts as a lubrication so that the tool can kind of cleanly glide over the tool or the clay. And right now what I'm using is the end of this paintbrush, and I'm just using this to kind of smooth out, and kind of also I'm very kind of moving the clay. I don't know if you can see that or not, but I'm kind of channeling this clay in a certain way that's conforms to the end of this tool. And what I did just there is I took this tool and I kind of impressed it right there where the eyes, the kind of the points of the eyes. And then I'm going to smooth that out just a wee bit so it's not quite as dramatic. And I'm taking and pinching the clay kind of like so. And this is going to smooth that out. All right. And then I'm going to kind of smooth that clay out a little bit more. I know at this point we're finessing some details. I'm not getting too carried up with it. I want it to be finessed, but I'm not gonna be, if I crush something with my fingertips, I'm not gonna be too upset about it. That's also a good reason why it's good to have this on a surface that you can pick up and move around so that you can adjust it to the angle that you need it to be. So I'm not constrained. If I'm working on a table, then I have to physically get up, or I have to move the entire surface. So that's one of those reasons why it's handy to work on a surface that you can pick up. Like I said earlier, I usually work on a subway tile, and that's a good kind of way of doing that. So I'm going to kind of smooth this in the nostril holes a little bit more, and then I'm going to go in and open them up a little bit more. And depending on the way that those are shaped, that can change the way the face looks. I don't necessarily want the nose to be as pointy. I kind of want it to have a little bit of a roundness at the tip. So I'm going to take, if I want that to be there, I can always take that little tool and round that out and smooth it out. And basically, I'm blending those edges, making sure that there's nothing kind of super sharp or um, like rough. And if I really want this to be really deep, I can always take this tool and kind of insert it in there. And it kind of looks weird. It looks like I added double nose hole. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this tip, and what that does is it creates the illusion of depth. So if I want that nose to be a little bit more pronounced, I can kind of sculpt into that, and you can tell that I'm desperately missing my go-to African porcupine quill. And one of the reasons why I generally prefer using African porcupine quills as opposed to like an American porcupine quill is that American porcupine quills are usually much smaller and thinner and not as robust. So the African porcupine quills are a little bit more like they're a little bit more girthy, and you can do more with them. Um, they are also made of keratin, which is a natural material that's akin to what your fingernails are made out of. So you can polish and use materials that you would use on your nails to refine those points and tips and things so that you can really get the best kind of shapes and textures that you want using them, and not have to get a ton of specialized equipment or materials that are hard to find. Or there's some things like there's different processes that you have to like, you know, grind the lily root on the last Sunday of the month and the moon and the right orientation. And while I can appreciate that, it's sometimes not always very practical. Or you have to get it from this one person who is like doesn't use the internet, and you have to like do smoke signals and do different things like that. And while that's admirable that they can live the life they want to lead, sometimes it doesn't always make it conducive to getting the tools or materials that you need to work on what you need to work on. So that's one of the reasons why I like using the African porcupine quill, just because you can use readily available materials around the house and that you might already have, and you can manipulate the end. Now, African porcupine quill is kind of specific, but they are available on the internet, so it's not something that is like completely obscure. It's not like a unicorn hair that you're gonna have to like wrestle elves to get. Um, you can still get them. And the other thing that I like is that it's sustainable in the sense that they don't have to kill the animal. Um, they shed them naturally or when they're in distress. And so um, there used to be this kind of zoo nearby, and they had an African porcupine, and they would just fall out, and people would just give them to you, and you could take them, and um, you didn't have to even buy them. Some people use them for jewelry and doing different things. Now, one thing I will say is you have to clean these every once in a while. So, because sometimes what will happen is the clay will build up, and then you'll get what I call boogers, clay boogers. So, I'll take a wet wipe and just wipe the end of it. It makes it a little bit easier to sculpt. Sometimes the alcohol will kind of dissolve the clay, so just be careful. You don't want to do a bunch of detail work and then go over with a wet wipe and then erase all your hard work. All right. So the other thing that I'm going to think about now that I've got this is a chin. So that's up to you about the chin. I'm going to give a little bit more of a more pronounced chin. So I'm going to take a little ball of clay. I'm going to roll out the tips right here like this. So it kind of looks like a plump croissant that hasn't been folded over. And then I'm just going to smooth that in there to the face like this. So it's not attached right now. So if I wanted to, I could just peel this off right now. So you stick it on, and then you kind of press it in, and then you smooth down the edges. Now, if you wanted to, you could take a little bit of liquid polymer and go in there and do stuff. But I don't think you have to do that. I've made probably thousands of these faces And there's very few times that stuff has broken off if I've done it where I've attached all the kind of seams and blended them. You know, if you roll around on concrete, you're going to have problems anyway, but it's not going to do you favors as far as, you know, polymer is a very sturdy material, but it's not indestructible. I know there are some people out there, they're like, yeah, you can shoot a bullet and it's fine. But in my experience, it, you know, all things have their optimal conditions. And if you want them to thrive, you kind of have to work within those parameters. Otherwise, they will fail. So what I'm doing right now is I'm kind of blending down these cheeks just a little bit, and I'm kind of smoothing that point of connection with where I've added the chin, and also so that it's got kind of a little bit of a smoother shape. You can see how this is kind of like bulged out. This is gonna kind of soften the face a little bit and make it less dramatic, I guess, in some ways. You could definitely make it more dramatic if you want the cheekbones to be super super high or whatever, or if you want it to change the face, you know, it's up to you. Now, I've kind of been ignoring the lips, and one of the things about this is uh, you know, as you I don't want to add too many details where there's going to be a lot of sculptural kind of changes. So at this point, I could squish this down and really round out the face if I want it to be rounder, and I don't have to worry about removing a ton of material, okay, or losing a lot of detail. I will kind of smooth this out, the forehead. And what I'm going to do next is I'm going to take two tiny little balls and I'm going to attach them to the brow. And depending where you put them, it will determine the facial expression. All right. And Julie says, love this. Oh, I'm glad that you're enjoying this. I know that this can kind of be a little bit not necessarily tedious, but it is something that is more detail oriented, and not everybody's into this clearly. So, like, we started off with like 40 people and we're down to like 20. And I know people are doing other things and like watching other lives or whatever. But so I know it's not for everybody, but I think that the people who do want to do this and continue to do this, they, you know, they might have some value out of this. So depending on where you put these balls will determine the brow and the brow shape. So if I put these right here, I'm going to be, you know, it's going to have a higher brow right there. There's going to be a bump there. And we can sculpt in hair if we want. So I'll go into that a little bit more when we get closer to that. But again, we're just kind of roughing out the highs and lows of the face and creating those peaks and valleys and those bone structures. And we can use our fingertips to smooth this down. It kind of looks like I didn't do anything, but it's real subtle, but you can kind of see it, right? There's a little bit of a swell right there on that I'm gonna say occipital ridge, but I probably am making that up. It's been a while since I took anatomy, y'all. But that bone that is ocular, maybe ocular ridge. And this kind of builds in the idea of muscles in the face. All right. Generally speaking, a lot of people try to get rid of that. But for us, we're building in character and shape, and we're conveying storytelling through what we're doing. So if we make it completely smooth and we remove all traces of, if we make everything smooth, it'll kind of look weird. And I think y'all know what I'm talking about. Like if you remove too many details from the face and you take away too much texture, it can kind of just look like a blob. And if you want that look, go for it. But if you want something that has a little bit more humanity to it, or a little bit more character, a little bit of a visual storytelling, then you'll embrace those kind of quirky little bumps and nooks and dips and dots, and that helps. All right. So right now, we've got these lips, and they kind of look brown, like frowny time. There's not very much expression to this. And one of the things you'll realize is if you want to build in smiling, for example, look at somebody who's smiling and um, try to, if you want something to smile, you'll have like usually there'll be a muscle that connects right here to here, and you'll have a little bit of a ridge. So if you want this to be smiling, you'll take a little coil, put that in there, smooth down the edges, and kind of do that. Now, if you want just kind of oops, I'm just sinking those a little bit deeper. This one's a little bit higher than the other one. So I just realized that. So I just pushed that in a little bit deeper. And of course I pushed it in too much. So this one I'll have to push in a little bit more. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this pointy awl tool, and I'm going to go into the corner of the mouth and kind of that was a little bit too big, but oh well. And that's going to create that kind of where your lips come, like if you look at your face, your teeth kind of go like this, though, and there's a recessed area that's around uh, your teeth, if that makes sense. So if you imagine if you imagine this as a skull, here's the skull hole for the eyes. The nose is on top of that triangle of your nose hole. And then these cheeks are where the bones are. And then here, the chin and this jaw is separate. Your mandible is separate from this shape. So you can kind of picture it, use your x-ray vision and see it. It's like this shape that I'm making. And it's like this. And this is a jaw, and that connects into the uppermost part of the skull. And the teeth are here behind the lips, the upper and the bottom, and then there's going to be a recess here and here. So what I do is I'll kind of cut that in, and then I'll smooth this out, right? So that was a little bit aggressive, the way that I made those holes, but I think it helps, because what we're doing is we're building in those shapes that are there in the face, but maybe we don't necessarily, when we look at a face, we don't always look at somebody's skull through their face. I mean, I do, and it's kind of weird sometimes, I admit it. But like I'll look at somebody's face and I'll think about what their skull looks like underneath that face. And that's probably a little bit morbid, but it is what it is. And so I'm kind of working that in, smoothing it in with this smooth shape on the back. And like I said, if we wanted to build in a smile, we're going to build in the smile lines. You can also add dimples if you want. Now, sometimes when I teach this, I will use different color clays so that you can get a look of a more direct look at what you're doing. Um, and you can see where you're blending things. And sometimes I'll use something that's more closer to flesh tone. The thing is that that can trick you. And I'm gonna recommend that if you haven't done this before, to use a color that's not traditionally a skin color. But maybe this is a blue person, you know, when the Kentucky blue people. Um, so there you go. Yeah, who knew I was making a book club project? Either that or I'm listening to The Stolen Air by Holly Black, and the main character, Ren, she has blue skin also, and blue hair, dark blue hair that's almost black with green eyes. So maybe that's what I'm doing. Um, so I've got this, and I'm kind of, and Vanessa said, Blue Man Group. Yeah, they're more blue. They're more of a cobalt. So, okay, so the next thing we're going to do is work on smoothing this down a little bit more. And if I want, I can always go back in and take the fine end of this and go back and kind of trace different lines. All right. So if I need to go through and do that, I can do that. And then I'll add some details to the lip. So I'll take that fine point and I'll make little lines. If you add too many lines, it looks like they are desperately dehydrated. So don't go too hog wild, because sometimes it can make them look like they're sick or whatever. But also, if you want, sometimes there's this little what do they call that? Cupid's bow in the mouth. And it will come down and make the lip go like that. So there you go. All right. So here is like this is I think it's a pretty good face so far. There's a couple lines here that I'm going to smooth out. And you can kind of see, we'll look from different angles. This is real rough in there. So I know that I need to go in here and take this and blend it down. And if I want to make that a little bit softer, I'll make that a little bit softer. And then if you want, you can add, like, if there are lines in the face that are here, or if you want to add like forehead lines, you can add them in there. You can add lines here to age the face. A couple of these are good, and you're going to have these whether you want them or not if you sculpt this way. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. When you go to add paint to this, if you paint this, it's those little nooks and crannies are going to stand out more. So just be mindful of that. So that when you go and you add paint later, you're not surprised when the paint kind of pools in here and makes the eyes look even deeper. So if you don't want that to be as deep, you can always smooth that down. And you can also remove clay as well. So far, I haven't really shown you removing clay as much. I've just showed mostly an additive process, but it's up to you about how your character is. You can build in a lot of facial expressions with a couple of gestural lines. So if you want them to look more mad, you'd make sharper lines like this and push that brow down so that there's more of a harder line of the brow, right? And you can put little lines here of where the brow furrows. Um, I don't necessarily want to have a super angry looking face, so I'm just going to smooth these down, and it's kind of like a serene, placid face. And I'm going to continue to kind of finesse and, as one of my teachers said, massage the face a little bit, massage those details, um, and smooth out some of the lines, but not too many, because I want this to kind of look like a realistic-ish person. And one thing that I'm doing is I'm going up here and smoothing this down and pushing this over. And then on the side here, I'm going to kind of pull this out so that there's a line that goes from here to here. Now, if I'm going to design this for making a mold of, what I'm doing here is kind of dangerous. And what I mean by that is what I'm creating is what's called an undercut. And an undercut is not good if you want to make a mold. Um, so if you want to have a mold, if you want to make a mold of this, that is where the clay or the molding compound, the silicone, is going to get stuck and it's going to rip there. So if I was going to design this for a mold, what I would do is try to make it so there are less undercuts and try to do it so that there aren't places that are pushed in too deep where the clay or the silicone can get stuck and ripped out. So it also that I think it's a another point about know what you're going to design. So if you're making something that's a one of a kind, it doesn't really matter. But if you know that you're going to make something for reproduction, you want to make it so that it is easier for you to do what you need to do, so you don't uh, ruin your mold or make it super hard. You can just have it so that you can kind of um, just have that. And then if you want, you can add dimples, little things like that. Generally, when people have dimples, they're not super severe, so you want to blend it down if you do add them. And there you go. Lena says, I love this so much. I think I only did something of monsters because of the yellow eyes, but now they look too friendly. Oh, only thought of monsters because the yellow eyes, but now they look too friendly. Wow, I think it's one of those things. Norma says that's fascinating. Totally changed the look of the mouth. Vanessa says, I love it. Are you making it for the shop? I don't really have an intention for this, but excuse me. We'll see. Marianne says, thank you, Andrew. It is amazing. Jody says, love this. So what do you do with this once you have this and you're happy with it? So what I'm going to do, I'm going to smooth that out a little bit. And also keep in mind, if you do this the first time and it doesn't look exactly like mine, uh, make another one. Keep going. I've made a lot of these faces over the years. And so for me, it's one of those things where I've made a lot of them. So I have the practice and experience. Here's another thing, as I'm going to kind of press that like that and smooth that out, make that kind of less pronounced. And if you want to add hair, take a very sharp point of an awl or even a sharp, like almost like a razor. Let's see. This one might be sharp enough. And to do the hair, you kind of just, of the eyebrow, you're going to create those indentations. And that's going to create, whenever you put a wash of paint on this, it's going to stick in those little grooves we've made. And so that's going to create the illusion of an eyebrow, if you want to add that. Now, sometimes people will use a tool like this, and it's basically a bunch of wires that have been shoved in there. And to do that, you go like this. It's less precise, or more organic, I guess. And if you were super particular about skin texture, you can take this tool also and gently stipple it, and then smooth it and gently stipple it. And that'll give you the look of pores. I try to make my face not have pores generally, and I spend a lot of money on products to make my face have not a lot of pores. So I guess that's if you're going for more a realistic look. But if you want it to have more details, that's one way you can add them. Diane says, so fascinating. Love to watch your process of creating. Teresa says, great tutorial, Andrew. Okay, awesome. I'm glad people are enjoying this. I had to deal with somebody earlier on the comments. You might have noticed that I kind of got thrown for a loop for a second because somebody was coming in here and leaving kind of weird spammy comments. So I had to take care of that earlier. I don't know if any of you noticed that or not. But anyway, so you could noodle around with this. I call it noodling, forever, really. You could just keep going and going and never stop. But the idea is, what do you do with this after you're happy with the look, right? What do you do with this? So you can do this a lot of different things. I taught a class online. It's called Ragamuffins. And basically, we made these faces and we attached them to laser cut wooden silhouettes. And so I don't know if I have any left over, but you could put this, you would bake this in the oven, tent this with aluminum foil or your choice of tenting material. Lennis was talking about taking one of those casserole, those aluminum foil casserole dishes from the Dollar General, and putting it over the creation like that, and that works. There's a lot of ways that you can do that. Tent this, put in the oven, 275 for every 15 minutes for every quarter-inch thickness. I would probably leave this in there for maybe 45 minutes, 30 to 45 minutes. And another thing to mention is that if you are super worried about messing things up, and or you want to add other details on top of this, you can bake this and then work on top of this. So if you decided, oh, I want to add horns to this, but you're worried that the horns for some reason will horns are a little bit different because, especially if you use a different color clay or something like that, where you would want to embed them in. But if you wanted to add, something for some reason or build up layers of it, or if you wanted to work in like translucent layers, you can bake this and then add clay on top of it and sculpt on top of it. So say you bake this and then you look at it later and then you're not happy with the nose, like you want to have a little ball on the nose. You could take and bake after this is baked. You take a little ball, put it on top, smooth it in, make it nice and smooth. Um, I would say work the clay so that it's nice and kind of almost sticky, so that it gets a full adhesion. Or if you were going to add like a dot, like if you wanted to add like clothing onto this, you could bake this and then wrap the raw clay around it and create hair. And you can build ears and things like that. And so this is not necessarily the end. So if you want to add more, you can definitely add more if you're so inclined. So what you could do a lot of things with this. If you wanted this to be an art doll, you can take, and what I would do if I was going to make this into the head of an art doll, instead of sculpting flat, what I would do is take some aluminum foil, smush it into a ball, and then wrap the clay around that, and then sculpt in 3 dimension, have it put on a stick like that, and then you can sculpt and move it and do different things like that. And if you want to make a head for like a doll, if you wanted to use this as a cabochon, you could use that as a cabochon. You could mold this and cast this in resin or something like that and do all kinds of cool effects, and then set that with bezel setting or prong setting. The nice thing about this is that it's lightweight, so you can use glue. um, you do have to be mindful of what glue you use and how you use it. So if you want this to be really firmly connected, you could mix up some epoxy and set that with epoxy. Um, I've made brooches where generally speaking, if you're going to add like a pin back, you want to do it into the raw clay. So if you wanted to do that, you can peel this up. You have to work it from all the different sides and kind of flex that up so you don't end up smashing all the work you just did. And insert it into here and then embed the pin back into the clay, the raw clay, and smooth that in so that it's embedded into the clay. If you glue it, it works, but it's not going to be as sturdy if you have it not embedded. You can glue it, but sometimes with like if you use like E6000, it's kind of a flexible glue. You can just peel it off. Even hot glue, which I use sometimes on my pins, if you work at it, you can peel it off. So just be mindful of that. So it depends on what you're doing and how you want to do it and what you're going to use it for. Um, so, like I said, you could use this as a cabochon. If you wanted to, you could use this as a bead. So, the way to do that, there's a couple different ways. You can create the hole while the clay is raw. The the issue that you're going to run into if you do that when the clay is raw is sometimes you can distort your work. So if you went to all this trouble to sculpt this, and then you start digging around with this old tool to put holes in it, sometimes when you're doing that, it can mess up other parts. Excuse me. So that's not always ideal. If you do want to have it be a bead, um, you can make a ball or whatever shape. Before you start, gently twist it in, and then let me see. All right, so if you can't see this, I don't know what setting William had this on, but he got it so that you could zoom in real close. But on the very tip, you can see that tiny tip coming through, right? So you just pull that out. You find that little hole and then twist it again. And that's going to make a nice smooth hole. And this, if you did it right, it should come out the original hole. And what I would do is I would probably leave it on something like this actually something like a wire. I'd insert the wire in there so that you can select however thick the gauge wire you want the hole to be, and then leave that in there while you're working. This is not an optimal demo idea with a paper clip, but you get the idea. And then work on it like that. And then whenever you bake that, just bake that in there so that you put it on a mandrel and have it so that it doesn't touch the bottom. Because if you touches the bottom, it's going to make a flat spot. So you can either have this suspended in open air by having something like, it's almost like a spit roast where you've got little notches in it, and then you can put the mandrels in, and it will hold this and suspend them in open air so that they don't get flat spots. Or you can bury them in cornstarch or in baking soda and do that, but that can cause other issues. So just be mindful of that. And then when you do that, it's got a hole and you don't have to mess around with it after. Now, the other option is that once you've baked, say this is going to be a little bit trickier, is to take the, like on a flex shaft or, whatever you're using to drill, and then drill the hole after it's baked. So it's a little bit tricksy, you have to be, you have to keep that in mind when you're working, just so that, you don't accidentally, for example, if you try to drill through the glass eyes, it's not going to necessarily work to your advantage. So you have to get a drill bit that will cut through polymer clay. Sometimes what I'll look for is one that will, you don't need a diamond bit because it's soft enough. But what I look for is one that's designed for wood. Sometimes they'll say it's good for polymer, but generally speaking, if you're at like the hardware store and you start talking about polymer, depending on who's helping you, they may or may not know what you're talking about and think you're talking about something completely different. So I get ones that are rated for wood, and then I can drill it in there, and they leave clean holes. Now, it will sometimes you have to get that angle, that geometry of your holes just right. Because if you go in at a weird angle and then you try to go in from the other side at a weird angle, they may not always connect, or it can leave kind of a rough spot inside, which will make fishing something through a little bit harder. Now, another thing that you can do if you're it's easier before you add details, of course, is sometimes there's tubes. You can get these tubes, they're made out of metal, and you can insert that in there and then just chop it off, and it will have a clean hole where there's no obstructions and it's already kind of embedded in the piece. So there's a lot of different construction things that you can consider. Um, and it's something, it's all about troubleshooting. I feel like if you want to do a certain thing, it will make you adjust your process so that you can kind of do that. Now, one of the simplest things that you can do to turn this into a pendant, for example, is to take some wire. This is just a head pin that I have laying around. Crinkle up the edges and insert them in. And then there's a bail, and you can, call it a day. Smooth the clay around it. We kind of talked about it when we did this, when we added this. You know, see, it's pretty locked in there. I mean, if I really started yanking on it, and if I got pliers, I could definitely pull it out. But the goal is not to do that, right? So there's lots of ways. If you want like a really kind of very direct process of adding a hole, you can take this awl and put it in the forehead. You just have to make sure that if you do that kind of hole through like the forehead or whatever, that you have enough meat on the top of this so that when you're putting this through, if you go too close to the edge, it will just snap off. So just keep that in mind, because that is one of the points that's going to have um, the most stress on it. So if you put it like right next to the edge here, you may as well just, I don't know, dent the top of this because that's what's going to happen. It's going to just pop right off, and then you're going to have to patch that. Now, if you do make a mistake, it's not the end of the world. You can always, like I said, fix things after the fact. If something happens where this gets like really dented or chewed up, take the clay and work it back and forth until it's really sticky. And then you can go back in, and when it gets really sticky, you can tell it's sticky because if it goes like this and it breaks like that, that's not sticky enough. So you want to work this until it's really like chewing gum, where you when you pull it, it will stretch, not break. So you just work that back and forth and condition it until it's really sticky, and then you can smear it into. All right. Let me destroy something real quick for your educational purposes. So, all right. So this one, I'm going to just put this in here, and you can carve polymer clay. So if you have sharp tools, you can definitely do that if you want. But say you've got this gouge and you don't want that gouge to be there anymore. You've got this clay that's super sticky, and what you do is you kind of roll it out into a snake or whatever shape it is. You press it in firmly, and then you wipe it away. So you smear it away. Um, and you don't want to push too hard, because if you push too hard, you're going to dig the clay out of that recessed area. Um, and you'll have other issues. And then you just smooth and blend the edges. And if you use the same color clay or like it, um, you'll never know it's there. But since this is a blue clay, I think it's good for demo purposes so that you can see that you can repair it. Like if you gouge it and you don't like it, you can always patch that deep gouge. Now, say you patch it and you're like, I hate this. You can always scrape it out and try again, I guess. So if you have that and you don't like it, you can always do it again. All right. So this is how to patch that if you want to patch like a deep gouge. Um, or say you don't like the nose on this thing, you can always fill it in and redo it. What I would say also is if you make a mistake and you're not happy with it, just make another one. You know, I think sometimes when we work on something, especially for the first time, there's this idea of like perfectionism. We want everything to be perfect. And if we started a thing, that thing has to be like monetized, or it has to be perfect the first time. But one of the things that you learn as a maker is that like sometimes the first time doesn't work out. Sometimes the second, third, or 10th time doesn't work out. So just if you get to a point where you're just like super unhappy with it and you want it to be looks different, just make another one. Polymer clay is relatively inexpensive. It's something that's readily accessible. It's not going to break the bank if you make like a dozen of these. And your 12th one is going to be, and I hate to break this to you, it's going to be better than your first unless you get the beginner's luck. But yeah. Bonnie says, "Can you sand it?" You can sand it. Remember that if you use a lower grit sandpaper like a 220, it's going to really roughen up the surface of it, and that can be useful as well if you're doing any kind of attachments. You sometimes you want that rough surface so that you can have a tooth for the clay or whatever you're gluing onto it to have something to hold it. But then you would work to a higher grit sandpaper, so 400, 600, 1,000, and you can get it like mirror polished. You can actually get one of our friends, that's their whole thing about polymer clay is they get these really smooth, bright, like glassy surfaces. And how they do that is they use wet, dry sandpaper at a super, super high grit count, and they just smooth it out super, super bright. Now, if you do sand it, I am going to recommend that you wear a face mask and that you do it with wet, dry sandpaper and that you do it with a little bit of water. Now, there's two reasons. For one, you don't want to breathe in plastic dust. That's the biggest reason. You don't want to get issues by breathing in polymer clay dust. Now, the other reason is that when you're working, the dust and the polymer clay dust and the water will make kind of a slurry, and that will create its own polishing compound. When we were carving tagua nuts as children, we were doing these things for faux scrimshaw. And what we were doing is we would add a little bit of water to that powder and it would make its own polishing paste. So that's one thing that also helps using the wet dry sandpaper and a little bit of water. Not only does it keep the dust down, but it will create a compound that will help aid you in creating the surface that you are looking for. All right. Let me know if you all have any other questions. I'm gonna do a face, and I'm gonna do this in like double time, y'all. I don't know if you all want to see this, but it took us like an hour or two to make the first face. But I think once you see it um, in action, you can see it how quickly you can do this. I mean, it's not super fast, but you can definitely get an idea of how it's in real time. And let me know in the comments if you have questions, and I'll try to answer them as we go. All right. And you can also play with like the directions of the eyes if you wanted to. If you wanted it to be more of like a little monster creature or a little Halloween creature, you could do that easily. If you don't want to have a nose, you can leave out the nose. And remember, when you're working, kind of clean up the edges as you go. This is going to be a really sweet, kind of basic face. Um, it's not going to be high, like as detailed as the other one, but I think, we can still get some expression in there. And this is just to show you how quick this process is if you practice and you know, you do kind of some work with it. And also, I mean, I started off a little bit more, uh, the eyes less open, but they open up when you press it down. So there's that. So, and I used to sell these ornaments. I called them podlings. And so I would sculpt these faces all the time. And I had a lot of fun doing it. And I sometimes when I'm working with, like, I kind of got in the mood to work with polymer again when I was playing with it to show you how those stamps worked. Um, Julisa's so cute, and I didn't even do anything hardly yet. And maybe I'll just add a little bit of a lip here and a little bit of a bottom lip there. It kind of looks funky doodle right now, but that's because we haven't blended the edges in. And I kind of want to do a series of the vegetables because I did a series of paintings with the anthropomorphic vegetables or fruit. And what I did is I kind of added faces to the fruit. So in my mind, I'm kind of like, maybe I'll do that again. And then maybe I want this to be a little bit surprised or have a little bit, I'll put this in there and then we'll put a little, I don't know, I don't like that one. So I'll take those, smooth this out. That's the other nice thing is if you don't like something and you want it to change, you can always smooth it over and it's not the end of the world. I'm going to think about how I structure this face. But if you wanted it to have kind of a different face, you can do that. If you want it to smile, you can have it smile. If you want it to frown, you can make it frown. That doesn't really look like a frown, but and then you could just like kind of, let's see, can add nose hole that kind of looks like a little bit Voldemort style. I don't know about that. So you can change it. If you want to have a little nose, you can take a little bit of clay, just a small little bump of that, put that in there. Smooth it up, smooth it down. So there you go. You can add little rosebuds to their face. Make it and like it's like a little zephyr if you wanted. So there's a lot of options. Somebody says, okay, I need you to teach a class on how to make faces like this. If you watch I just went through step by step on how to make this. So if you want to do more rough and ready, you can easily do that. And we went step by step. All right. And then if you want it to look more sad, you can adjust the brows. If you want this to look happy, round this out, more bright-eyed, round. Somebody said that they think it looks like E.T. That's because it doesn't have hair and it's rounded and it's got round eyes like that. But you can easily change that by adding hair. I mean, that's not the best, but it changes the look. You just have to press this down, smooth it out. And you can take this tool and texture it like that, and it creates that kind of texture. Or you can take a sharp tool like this and texture it like that. So there's a lot of options. You can also, if you want, roll this out into little coils. Ann Merkel says, what kind of clay? It's a blend of Sculpey and Primo. So it's polymer clay. And again, if people want, they can watch the replay of this. And I go through step by step on how to do this. And you could put this like so and build up the hair like that. So, or you can do a combination of the techniques. One thing I will say is if you do hair like this, it is super, super duper fragile time. So you do have to make sure that you kind of press it down as you go. And if you want to do ears, all you have to do is take and put and make a shape that's kind of an ear shape. And put that in there like that. And then you just press it down in there. Can take this tool and stab that in there to make the recesses for the ear holes. Um, and it's not like the best, but it's a very kind of playful interpretation. And you just smooth that down. And mostly that smoothing down is so that there is connection between that. So that took how many minutes? Maybe 5 minutes, 10 minutes. And of course, if I was doing this for realsy, I would smooth all these down and make all that. But you can also add more texture. If you want to have more texture, you can do more texture and more lines, more character, and just really go in there and detail it. Um, and that'll give it a different look. You can kind of carve it away with this surface of this and do different things where if you know you're going to have all these kind of lines and creases, instead of fighting it and trying to make everything super smooth, then add those lines and, you know, embrace that kind of chaos of that. And so, and then, and the wrinkles don't necessarily, or the lines, they will kind of look like age lines. But what I will say is this, is that just because there are lines does not necessarily make it look old. Um, One thing that you'll see a lot of times is that sometimes when people try to like age a face, all they will do is they'll add lines. And that's the most obvious idea of how to age a face. But if you wanted to age a face, there are certain things that happen to a face as it ages. So you'll get like jowls down here, so you could beef up here. Generally speaking, the nose will become more bulbous over time. So you would add more of a rounded nose and move and smooth that in. Eyelids kind of droop, so you would want to incorporate that. You know, you can shift it so that you can put more of a hooded lid like that. And you can add facial hair if you wanted to. That's another thing you can do that happens. Generally speaking, lips thin as you age as well. So if you took and removed some of the lips so they're not as like full as say this, you can age it that way as well. And then there are certain creases that happen. So if there's a line in here, there's a fold. That's actually your skin. The muscles of your face are actually attached to your skull, really. That and so I mean, they are, but they are not like attached. So if you want to if you want to create those, like the idea of aging, there are shapes that happen. So there'll be like a V shape as opposed. So like if you're gonna put cheeks, you'll put like a V shape for the cheek. But that comes from studying faces And one of the things that I recommended early on in this video is if you want to kind of replicate life, it's good to look at life. And then if you want, you can like hollow them out or do different things like that. And this is really just kind of stuck on there, but then you could blend these down and you can age a face that way. So there's a lot of things you can do. And like I showed earlier, this is not really attached until I blend it down. So if I don't like it, I can just pull it off like so and kind of start from square one and you know it's not the end. All right, there you go. So we did this face, it took 2 hours. We did this face, it took like 10 minutes, and I was futzing around with it. um so you know um and somebody says Yoda. Yeah, you could do that. I mean, it's one of those things where um things look like things, but what how you change those details is how you will differentiate your pieces from other people's creations. Um, so if you don't like it when people say, "Oh, that looks like ET," well, ET has a very prominent eyes and there's no hair and there's no ears. So if you want it to not look like that, then you can make ears. If you wanted it to look more like those things, like say you wanted this to look more like baby or more like Yoda, like no hair for one, except for behind the ears, maybe. And you would, I don't know if I'm allowed to say Yoda and then like teach that because I've seen where people have gotten their stuff removed from Disney. But so this is if you wanted to make a like a Star Warsy kind of creature and then make some bigger ears, you know? So you can definitely change it up, but you can even make them bigger than that. And um that's one of the hallmarks of that. And then there's some chin things happening with the where it's got a small chin. So you would kind of go like that. And the eyes are black, so you could get black eyes. And of course, you'd smooth down these ridges. And you have a little bit of a nose. So there you go. So if you wanted to do that, you could do that easy. And especially color helps, you know? So if you wanted to have if you want somebody to really think this is like baby Grogu or Yoda or whatever, use a green color clay and it will definitely have more of that look. So, but I mean, that's one of those things where like small changes will change this dramatically. So if you added great big um like cheekbones and you added bigger lips and you made a pointy nose, like of course then it kind of looks like those gremlins, I guess. But you can change the look like anything. Like have this all of a sudden you're in Mogwai territory. Um so it's kind of weird how we can change the face with some simple changes like that. Or if you wanted more fishy, you know, with fish, they have more of a connected ridge on their face, so their mouths are wider and or um, that ridge goes across like so, And you would blend this edge down. And maybe put this in there like that. So a little bit more of a fairy creature. If you wanted, you could have a very bulbous nose and play with proportions like that. So, that changes that look, and just sculpt those ears a little bit better so that there's a little bit more definition. So here's another character. Smooth this down. And then if you wanted to add more details, you can add more details too. I mean, I'm just sculpting as fast as I can sculpt, basically. But if you wanted to, add little bumps for horns, you know. So you can make fantasy creatures pretty easily. But at the same time, I think we're working in a realm where there are recognizable features, and the brain wants to find those faces in shapes. And one of those things, if we add something like this, if we don't tack it down by smoothing out the edges, it's going to pop right off. So just remember that. Generally speaking, if I'm going to do horns, I make the horns first and then I embed them in the clay. So those are the nostrils. Put this down. So you've got, you can do a lot with very little as far as William says, this is so much fun. Please remember to like and share, everyone. So there you go. William reminded everybody to like and share our little creature feature here. And of course, if you wanted it to have more of a bird-like quality, we would turn this into a beak. And we could make this into a little bit more pronounced as a beak. And maybe change the shape of that a little bit. So there's a little bit of a hobgoblin flair to that. But again, that's really, really just really basic, simple. And then if you don't like it, you can always just peel it up, pop the eyes out, and start over. So there you go. And if you're like, oh my gosh, what did he just do? We can always just go and start over again. Put the eyeball hole, the mouth hole, embed the eyes. You can make them real far apart. You can make one eye look off this direction, one eye look off that direction. Little mouth and nose. I think prettier faces are harder to do because you have to think of like the ideas of beauty and stuff. But when you have ideas that are like caricatures with like, they're more fantasy based, you can do things where you put great big eyelids or eyebrows and you kind of, I mean, That took maybe 2 minutes, maybe a minute, and we just all of it is just kind of finding um, those kind of refining those details. And also, one of the things that I always recommend is take your tools and experiment with mark making. So if you, what I will do is I will get a sheet of clay that I rolled out. We're going to pretend like I rolled this out. Press this in there and then play around with what the tools will make. So this one, you could do like gills with this. So you see, I've made these marks with this. I think it's important to play around. So if you wanted to do this, you could use this. And if you want, oops, I stabbed myself with this. So if you want that kind of texture, you can get that. And then change the angles of the tools. That also helps. So whenever you're going to, even this is like a drill, it's good to play around and experiment with what the different tools will make. And then you can make your own tools. Like this one has kind of like this tooth-like kind of shape to it. But then when you do like a pattern of it, it'll look very different than if you just do 1 or 2 marks. So if you want that look, you can get that look. Or this spade look, if I want to have this and build in feathers and a creature. So if you want scale marks, or this one's, if it's in a curve, you can do like fish scales. So that's one thing that I definitely recommend people do, especially if they're just starting out with sculpting, is and they're working with different tools, is play around with mark making and what you can achieve. Because if you make a mark, this is the same tool. If I go like this, it makes a different line than if I hold it at an angle and come at it smoothly. So this one was directly like this. It makes this like ripping texture. But if I turn it on the side, it makes a smoother side. Now, here's another little, I'm going off script, y'all. If you want a little tip to get rid of these boogers, these polymer clay boogers, after you bake something, take some fabric and just loosely brush over them, and those little boogers will break off. So if you're worried about that, you can do that. And you can use other materials also. Like this is a tube that was left over from that bowl, and I can take that and make this like pimply frog skin and make that. And then you can do these in combination, so it doesn't have to be all one thing. If you wanted, you can, make that little dot shape and then come around with it and make a little corpuscle. So there's options. I know that at this point people are probably losing interest, but I would definitely recommend playing around with the tools and doing some mark making, because then if you apply this to like a face or sculpture, you can add details where it's not all, I think sometimes we get this idea that there's only one way of making marks. And so, you could take a piece of coral that's got that kind of bumpy texture and use that in your thing. If you want something that's got a bark-like texture, use a piece of bark, use a piece of stone, and press that into the clay and use that to make the texture. And you can do a lot with your tools and have a lot of effect with very minimal tools, and I think have fun too. So again, it all depends on the look that you want to achieve. We went step by step through how to make a face that looks like this. But depending on what you do with the clay, you can have a lot of fun and explore the different proportions and sizes of features. And yeah, you can definitely have a lot of fun playing around with that. So I hope all of you who stuck around or had a chance to watch had a good time and that you enjoyed hanging out with me tonight. I know always enjoy hanging out with all of you. And if you do make anything using these tips and tricks and uh, utilize this instruction, um, you can always tag us. We always appreciate a good tag. And also, um, one of the things that we like is if you share those your creations. So if you go to um, our group, the Allegory Gallery Design Challenge group, you can share there. Or if you want to, if this is your first time sculpting, you can share in the William Tries group. Um, there's a lot of things that places that you can share. We would love to see what you make. And yeah, so tomorrow, the plan is that we're going to do day one of Kittapalooza, and we're just going to have Wednesday through Friday be our Kittapalooza um, festivities. So if you're curious what we're going to do tomorrow, we're going to hopefully launch some kits for day one of Kittapalooza. And we're excited, I enjoy making kits and I enjoy putting little combinations together. Hopefully people like them. In theory, Greg put the package in the mail with the missing beads and items that I picked up in Tucson. So we'll be able to start processing the Desert Discovery boxes and little bundles and get those out the door hopefully soon. And then once we do those, then we'll take whatever's left over and do the gemstone sale. And that should be next week or so. So if you're excited about that, we're excited about that too. And hopefully, you will tune in with us and check out all the goodies that we have brought back. I tried to be really good about finding unique things at affordable prices. The prices were higher this year in Tucson, so just be aware of that. They're not. It's not the prices of yonder year of old. So, it is what it is, unfortunately. So, William says bees are supposed to be here tomorrow if all goes as planned. Well, that would be awesome. I think there are some things maybe at the store tonight. But so, I've just basically made this face very quickly using the rough instructions that we just went over. And I think there's a lot of possibility. And one of the things that I really get excited about is how you take these ideas and make them your own. So whether you're going to do pan pastels on top, or you know, embed things in it, or make a creature. I think that that's where it's exciting for me, is to see how you'll take this and kind of these basic techniques and make them your own. And yeah, so there you go. Just a couple minutes work. It's real rough still. And if I wanted to refine this, I could. But you can see how, it's on its way to do that. I mean, this is a little bit crazy eyed, but that's all right. I think it's fun when you can have fun with it. June said, "Thanks, Andrew. Awesome knowledge share. So inspirational. I can't wait to see if you make anything." June, one of our celebrity community members. And I think also that another thing to think about is I'm working mostly with humanoid adjustments of features. So if you look at other animals or creatures and apply those structures onto this, it's going to change it. And I mean, the concepts are the same. It's working from the general to the specific. But you can do a lot of different things with some simple alterations of the features. Like if you wanted this to be more cat-like, for example, we would build up the muzzle and then put some little cheek meat there for the cats. And then where is that? So you can change up some basic things that we did with the humanoid sculpt and make it more feline by changing out some of those kinds of lines. And you can build up kind of that bridge there. It kind of looks more bunny rabbit right now, but and then again, look at pictures for reference, and you can then apply those to your sculpt, and it can change the look dramatically. We went from kind of a human face to now a more animalistic face in like 2 seconds. And you just play around with that, and you can make it a little bit more shape. Like if you have a like that is like their whiskery. And of course the ears. See, also, like I was talking about earlier about the general to specific, is look for characteristics that are going to be the most pronounced. So if you're trying to like capture the essence of somebody's face, what on their face is the most prominent? So if it's the ears on the cat, make big exaggerated ears, smooth down those, and then you can kind of play around you know? And then it comes to refining things down, smoothing things out, and then adding texture. That's where that kind of playing with mark making is helpful. And then you can kind of trick the eye with how you add directional marks. So if you want it to be extra fluffy, make the lines go off more in different directions like that. But if you want it to be super sleek, you would contour all the lines to be in the same directions and kind of smooth everything out. And again, I should have conditioned this clay a little bit more, but like you can get a lot of cool kind of looks with that. And then maybe for the muzzle, we'll have a little the whisker kind of marks. And this lip is kind of more human, so we would kind of take that and put that like that. And if we wanted to have fangs, we could have fangs and be really pronounced. So there's a lot of things that you can do with to change the look very easily and get a lot of expression and character out of your creature feature time. So hopefully you enjoyed this. I'm going to flip this around and Marianne says, I was late, so I didn't hear if you saw the eyes. I picked those up in Tucson, and we only have them in the one kind of greenish yellow color, but we'll put little baggies of those in the website either tonight or tomorrow. It depends if when William comes home, he is in the mood for that. So I'll flip this around. Hi, everyone. So hopefully you had fun hanging out with me tonight. We worked on this for probably 2 hours. And then the last 40 minutes or so, we just went off script and we played with mark making, how to make things more animal. I basically did like a total request live where people were naming off different creatures and I was sculpting them in real time. So, and the other thing that I will say about this is that right now it's all kind of blue and you're not necessarily going to see all of the details that you have sculpted. So one of the things that you'll be able to do once this is baked and fully cured is you can take and look at the video that we had about adding color, and the color is some of the techniques that we talked about adding color, we can it will bring out and accentuate some of those details. So some of those you won't really see until you add that layer of paint. And when you do that, it will you'll see more detail. Now, if you don't like it, you can always remove that color because sometimes you don't necessarily want all of the things to show. Sometimes you want things to look more smooth, even though it's rough. And so, if I have this in front of me, if I have a block of clay and I've got tools, I'm just going to noodle. And that's just like my personality. Like we went out to dinner and they had crayons at the table. And I had to like physically stop myself from coloring with the tool or the crayons. And I was like, well, I don't want to ignore you while you're, um, and I'm not ignoring any of you. Lena says, funny you were going cats. We'll have to watch the last bit since we had a cat drama over here with loads of vomit. Well, that sounds unfortunate, and I'm sorry that you're having to deal with that cat drama vomit situation. But basically, we just kind of went and I just played around with that. And like I said, small changes, you can do a lot with a few small changes. So, and I could go on and on about how we can shave down different things and carve out different shapes and it will change the look. But I kind of am excited to see what all of you do out there, because it's exciting to see what people make on their own. Marianne says, wow, I'm glad you liked it. So we did this and we did this. And we did a bunch of stuff in between. And then, like I said, if you don't like it, I'm not going to squash that one because it's kind of cute. But I was going to squash it. I was not. Lena says, this is the best video, I'm guessing ever. I only missed a little bit. Oh, I'm glad you liked it. All right. So thanks again for hanging out with us. If you like these tutorials, I try to do one every Tuesday. Not necessarily sculpting, sometimes beading, sometimes it just depends. If you want more tutorials, Jen is coming out with a new tutorial every Saturday morning. So that's another way of getting more information, more techniques. I watched both of them and they were really informative, and I like them. So hopefully you all like them as well. Marian said no squashing. Now I want to squash it just to be contrary. But one of the things that I talked about earlier is that this is not precious. If this was maybe like encrusted with diamonds, I would be hesitant. But if it's just polymer, it's I paid less than $2 for this, and it took less than 10 minutes to make this. So I'm not attached to this. I mean, I kind of am because it's kind of cute, but it's one of those things where if it's one of those things, it's not precious. So if you mess up and if you make something and it doesn't look how you want it to look the first time through, don't be hard on yourself. Just squash it and try again. Or you can, if you want to have those benchmarkers of your progress, put it in the oven, let it cure, put it off to the side. Sometimes one thing that I have done before is I've made stuff that I just absolutely did not like. I was like, I don't like this. And one of the things I've done is if I don't like something and I've made it and I put a lot of time into it, I'll stick it in a drawer and then come back to it whenever I come back to it. And generally speaking, if I do this, sometimes what will happen is I'll forget why I didn't like the thing at the time that I made it. And then sometimes I'll revisit something and I'll be like, yeah, I know why I didn't like that, because the nose is out of proportion, or the colors aren't, they're too jarring, or their composition is wrong, or the eye is a little bit higher. And you can come back to it with fresh eyes, or the benefit of me getting like more forgetful is then I forget why I didn't like it in the first place. So you can do stuff and forget what it looked like, and then you're like, wow, this actually looks pretty cool. Who made this? I've done that before. I was like, who made that? And then I was like, oh, I made that. So yeah, that's something that you can do if you mess up or you're not happy when you walk away from your project. and you can come back to it and look at it with fresh eyes and hopefully a new perspective. Jody says, thanks, Andrew. Love seeing this tutorial. Thank you, Jody. And Anne says, some of my best pottery was squashed. Yeah, and just make some more. That's one of the beautiful things about this material, is that it's accessible enough and inexpensive enough that if you squash something, it's not like the end of the world. And also, nobody else will really know unless you tell them. Like sometimes I share my when things don't always go right because I think it's more human. It's so weird, like with social media in particular, and these like parasocial relationships that we make. Sometimes with social media, we get this kind of glossed over version that's photoshopped and everything looks perfect and everything looks amazing and it looks like nobody had to do anything. Like some people were like, well, it must be nice to be rich, and I was like, who's rich, you know? But it looks like that sometimes from the outside because we have different properties now and we have different assets that other people don't have. And so from the outside it looks like it's like a ball, it's like a day at the park, but when you look closer you realize that it's a ton of work, or there's a lot of sacrifices that had to be made, or you were extremely fortunate in when the opportunity met the preparation and things all aligned. So I think it's one of those things where um, real life, there's mistakes, there's failures, and things don't always go to plan. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. Sometimes we learn the most when things go sideways. Um, I know that I've picked up more things when I've learned more things. Sometimes when things have failed catastrophically, um, and I could go into details about how things have gone ter- terribly, terribly wrong. And you kind of learn from those things. Um, and it's not always just about craft. Like sometimes it's about life too. Sometimes you've got to murder your darlings to level up to the next level. Sometimes there's this idea of preciousness where we don't want to blemish the perfect white seamless surface, and it almost seems like a shame to do that. um, but if we do that, we're holding ourselves back. So I think it's good, have fun, make a mess, learn from your mess, and work from the general to the specific. So you can always work on refining and fine tuning what you want to say and how you want to say it. And it's a good life lesson, if not a good craft lesson. Um, June says, many times with fresh eyes, things are not as bad as I thought, or mirror image helps to find the issue. That's also true. Sometimes with jewelry, sometimes what I'll do is I'll photograph something, even if it's not finished, and then I'll be able to see, like, especially if I zoom in, I'll see where things are like it's not like laying right, or I'll put something on and try it on. And if it doesn't hang right, then I can adjust it or mess with the weighting of the piece so that it lays properly. Sometimes you don't know until you know. And it's always good to kind of look at things from a different perspective. Like sometimes, and sounds weird, but if I lose something, I'll lay on the floor, and it may seem like I'm like giving up in defeat and I'm like relinquishing to the ennui. But sometimes then you look over and then you see it. So that's one of my tricks on finding stuff, is sometimes I'll give up, or not give up, but I'll lay down and look at things from a different perspective, and you'll see things you didn't see before. Lena says, I love when you paint and sculpt live. Things are not perfect, so over rehearsed. Um, yeah, I think it's important. I think when you see these things live, so that you know that things that don't always go to plan. Like sometimes when you are like I've been lucky enough to be on TV a couple times. And one of the things I practice and practice and practice before I go live on like for the TV. But the thing that I kind of don't like is sometimes if you mess up, they'll edit it out or you'll do a retake. The times that I've kind of messed up live on those recordings, I've kind of asked them to keep those things in so you can show how if you mess up, you can recover from that. So if you, like I did one on resin pouring, and I demolded it too quick. And so it was still sticky and it kind of came out where things were missing. And then I showed them how to fix that. So I said, if you have this problem, then go do this. So I think it's helpful to show when things are not always perfect because life rarely is. There's always a thing like, maybe the weather conditions are different or you get interrupted in a phone call by a phone call and the cat walks across your thing or you drop it. There have been times when I've made like the thing, I was like, this is a masterpiece, and then I've dropped it and then stuff would shatter or get squashed or um, fuzz would catch on. And sometimes those things are little happy accidents. Sometimes it's frustrating. Sometimes you have to kind of walk away and get a glass of water and stretch. And kind of if you find yourself hunching over and you're getting sore from it, if you're getting feeling that stress is being in your body, just get up, stretch, um, get a glass of water, get hydrated, or maybe take a break. One of the things I'm learning is that it's good to take breaks when you need them. So if you are exhausted and your eyes are starting to get blurry, maybe set it down, put something over it so that it doesn't get messed up, and then come back at it uh, after you've gotten rest and could rest your eyes, and then you see things differently. So hopefully, this encourages you all to keep trying, to keep making, uh, make some messes, have fun, do mark making. There's a wonderful artist uh, who did all these different ways of drawing that did not include the way that he was trained to draw. So he would do things like he would take sticks and tie them to his fingertips or tape them on his fingers, and he would take um, these bowls of India ink, and he would have to draw with the sticks on his fingers with the India ink, and kind of create the shapes and mark making that way, and or tie one hand to his back and he would have to paint with his mouth and things like that. And those are kind of extreme cases. But I always think it's good to experiment and explore because the more that you kind of broaden your horizon and you deepen your connection to a material, it allows you to have a more of a material knowledge of the thing that you're working with. So there are a lot of times when we can kind of plateau in our creativity and it can feel like we're stunted, and we just don't know the way forward. But sometimes when we go back to that process and we go back to the material qualities and have fun and exploring those processes and exploring that curiosity and creativity, that's when things kind of bloom, and you get surprised by sometimes by what kind of manifests from those explorations. And if anything, I hope that if if anything that I can impart is that love of learning, and that willingness to explore. Um, and yeah, hopefully um, you all enjoyed this and that you will continue to create and explore. And we thank you so much. And I hope you have a great rest of your evening. We'll be back tomorrow around 5 p.m. with Kittapalooza Day 1. And we've got lots of lovely things on the docket. So hopefully you all enjoy those as well. See ya.